Welcome to the Leadership with Biana Kovic Show, and thank you for being with us. Our topic, leadership, focuses on leaders such as yourselves. We believe that leadership is a skill that can be learned through practice and awareness. It is our hope that our conversation will help you become more reflective when it comes to your own leadership practices and enable you to leave a positive legacy. Our very special guest is Yonason Goldson. Yonason is Director of Ethical Imperatives, LLC, teaching professionals how good ethics is good business and the benefits of intellectual diversity. Yonason is a keynote speaker, TEDx presenter, a community rabbi, as well as a repentant hitchhiker and circumnavigator, former newspaper columnist, and retired high school teacher in St. Louis. Yonason has authored hundreds of articles and 5 books applying ancient wisdom to the challenges of the modern world. Rabbi Yonason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Biana. It's wonderful to be with you.
I'm very excited to have you on my show. You are the Director of Ethical Imperatives, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and about the company.
Okay, well, to make a very long story as short as possible, I graduated from the University of California with a degree in English. What do you do with a degree in English? You could do what I did. I went backpacking across the United States, and then I went hitchhiking across Europe. And after about a year of traveling, I ended up in Israel, where I reconnected with my heritage, with my roots. I grew up with really no knowledge of what it meant to be Jewish, and I rediscovered that discipline, that culture, and that philosophy. And I lived in Israel for 9 years. I spent that time studying the wisdom of my people and my heritage, and I became a rabbi. I taught high school for 23 years, and about 3 years ago, I retired from teaching, and I wanted to try to take that accumulated wisdom that I've absorbed and that I've been teaching and repurpose it, if you will, to present it to a general audience, take those fundamental values and insights and apply them to the business world. And I realized that if I wanted to encapsulate everything Judaism teaches into a single word, that word would be ethics, which is the awareness that our actions affect the world around us and that we have a responsibility to make sure that the way we behave, the way we act, the way we lead our lives has a positive influence upon our environment and upon the people who share our world. And the best forum for that, I believe, is the business world, because the one thing we all agree on is we want to make more money. And there's a mistake we make that we think we have to choose between doing what's right and doing what's necessary to get ahead in business. And I believe that just the opposite is true, that the more we make ethics the foundation of our business, ultimately the more successful we will be, both financially, personally, professionally, and that a culture of ethical affluence will spill over from our business into every other aspect of our lives.
That's very interesting. So, out of curiosity, is ethics the same as morality?
That's a fascinating question. I think that morality is the idea that there are values that come down to us from a higher authority, and that ethics is the awareness that we have to have values in our lives and live according to those values in order to have a positive influence and be responsible for the influence we have on the world. So they're definitely connected. I think there's a little bit of a nuance to differentiate between them.
You know, the way people run business is shifting constantly due to politics, due to culture, and so on and so forth. Does ethics shifts along with the culture and with the trends, or it stays constant?
There have to be certain ethical axioms that we all agree on. Because if we don't have some kind of common starting point, then there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to build upon. On the other hand, we have to recognize that the world changes and that we have to accommodate those changes. So that's why there's a phrase I use that compliance is the enemy of ethics. Because what businesses try to do in order to be ethical is they create compliance laws. Well, the problem with that is that ethics governs the vast gray area between what's legal and what's illegal. Ethics is a mindset. It's an attitude of being sensitive, of being empathetic, of being responsible for the effect of my actions. And if we relegate that to legislation, to simple rules and edicts, then we're in a sense abdicating making moral, making ethical choices. I'm following the law. I don't have to worry about whether my actions are ethical or not. And that's the opposite of what ethics is all about. Ethics is about cultivating a refined character and a mindset of awareness and responsibility.
But how do you marry two? Because people kind of say to you, if you're in compliance, then you're good. There is nothing to worry about. There is nothing more to think about. So how do you marry those two if people are not even thinking that ethics is important to be brought into the company's culture?
Well, you need to start with compliance, just like you need to start with the legal system. The legal system is a framework. It gives us boundaries. It gives us guidelines. But at the same time, it doesn't abdicate us from making good decisions. One of my favorite examples of this is the United States government for years has been trying to get us to use $1 coins. And for some reason, Americans just don't like them. We refuse to use them. And so a number of years ago, the Treasury Department offered an incentive deal. You could order a pack of 40 coins online, pay $40 on your credit card, and they would ship them to you postage free. And this would make it easier to get them, and then they would make it easier to disseminate the coins. So some clever people ordered a lot of coins, and as soon as the coins arrived, they went straight to the bank and deposited them right into their account, and then they pocketed the credit card points that they used from buying those coins. Well, so the government ended up spending a lot of postage and didn't get any coins into circulation. Now, these people didn't break any laws. There was no contract, but it was clearly unethical. That was not the purpose of the program, to give people a trick so they could get credit card points. It was a manipulation using the law to subvert the intent of the law. And that's really what ethics is all about. What is the law there for? What is the intent behind the law? What is the spirit of the law? The reason we have laws is to create a healthy society, a functioning society. And when we look for loopholes and we try to distort and pervert the law, then we're using the law to undermine the law. And that's why we need ethics.
So then would you say that ethics should guide laws?
Yeah, I think you could say it that way. And ethics is the mindset that allows us to employ the law, follow the law in a way that the law is meant to be followed. And that's why I say that perhaps the place we can reclaim this is in business, because if business leaders are models of ethics, then the people who work with them look up to them, admire them, want to be like them, recognize that they'll be treated fairly, that they'll be recognized for their work. That ethical culture can be restored in the context of business, which will help restore the mindset and the attitude of ethics in society while making us more successful, all of us together, in what we do.
So how do you bring ethics back to something that essentially doesn't have it to begin with?
Ideally, it goes top down. I worked for 20 years when I was teaching high school. I worked for a principal who was devoted to the mission of the school. He was devoted to the welfare and the education of the students. And that devotion took the form of passionate support for his teachers, because he understood that if the teachers are invested in being the best they can be, that's going to ultimately serve the students best. And so we knew that no matter what happened, he always had our backs. So if you have bosses who don't demonstrate that commitment to a mission, who don't demonstrate that respect and investment in the people who work for them and with them, then you're going to have a problem. And then as an employee in that situation, then it becomes up to me. Am I going to look for another job? Am I going to try to create on my own level an ethical mindset among my colleagues and hope that that will back its way up? It's going to be a much harder thing to do, because ultimately the culture tends to come down from the top.
But can you manage up your boss?
It really depends on the boss, and it really depends upon the structure of the work environment. You know, as CEO, he doesn't need to ask anyone's opinion, but if you ask your employees what they think, then they feel like their opinions are valued. Then they feel like they're part of the team, they're part of the decision-making process. And some of your advisors, some of your board members, they're going to have ideas that you haven't thought of. You know, when we talk about diversity, the most important thing with diversity is intellectual diversity, diversity of outlooks and opinions, because that's how you avoid the groupthink that everybody's echoing everybody else. And we may end up going over the cliff together because nobody is willing to speak up, because nobody feels it's safe to do that. So if you're in a situation where there's some receptivity to ideas, to feedback, then you can work within the system. If you're in a system where you get shut down as soon as you open your mouth, then that's toxic. And you're probably going to want to look for something else, because this is not an environment that lends itself towards success.
So are you saying to us, if the so-called boss is not open to changing, then it's really no way for us to kind of have an influence upon him or her.
Yeah, there's an old cartoon where the boss says to his executive, I hate yes men. Don't you agree, Perkins? What do you do in that situation? You're clearly not invited to give your opinion. So you're not in a position where you can actually make a contribution. If you know there's somebody who has the boss's ear and he's someone that you can talk to, then sometimes you can go through the back door. But if the administration, if the management or the ownership, if they are absolutely disinterested in feedback and suggestions, then there's really nowhere to go.
And, that's what we see here in New York. The turnaround is so huge. Like people are just constantly being recycled.
And that's a symptom of the problem. When people feel valued, when they feel like they're making a difference, when they feel like they're contributing, they feel they're part of a team, or so if it really works, you feel like you're part of a family. You don't quit your family. I was just talking to a former student of mine who's now working in New York, and he said his first job was so toxic, he hated every minute of it. And he said he was able to find another position that was much better. And now when he hears people that he works with complaining about their job, he realizes how fortunate he was to have had a much worse job first, because now he recognizes how good things really are. And he has colleagues, contemporaries, who are just looking for, where can I go next to make a little bit of more money, to get a little more power and influence? And he has no interest in going anywhere because he's taken care of, he's well treated, and he's able to do work that he finds meaningful as part of a team.
And I'm glad that you're mentioning toxic environment because it's real. Some people say it's just in your mind, but it is real. How do you deal with that? How do you go to work and hopefully find to do something, in such a toxic environment?
Listen, we all need to eat. And Simon Sinek has a wonderful story he tells. I think he said he was staying in the Four Seasons, and he went into a coffee shop there. And the barista, they call him behind the counter, is this guy. He's got a sense of humor. He's personable. He's chatting people up. And he's clearly having a great time doing his job. He's making everybody feel good. And so Simon Sinek asked him, you must love your job. And he says, yeah, it's great. So what do you like about it? He says, because every time my bosses come in, they greet me by name. They ask me how I'm doing. And they ask if there's anything they can do to help me in my job. He says, I have another job in another hotel in their coffee shop. And every time the bosses come in, they're critical of something. There, I keep my mouth shut. I keep my head down. I just try not to be noticed. So you've got the same employee in two different jobs, and he's got a split personality. He's two completely different people. Now, when you want to go for your cup of coffee, which of these shops are you going to want to walk into? And why it's so hard to sell this to some employers and some bosses, I don't understand. But that's my mission, is to make it clear that good ethics is good business and that being ethical is in our own best interest.
And I like that because the same employee actually performs differently in different places.
Exactly. A happy employee is a more productive employee. And that means you're getting more out of him. So why not? That's what we're there for.
Some bosses, some colleagues of mine, when I was overseeing a department, they said it's not my job to make them productive. What would you say to them?
I'd ask them what their job is. The job of a leader is to bring out the best in his or her people. And that has so many different levels. There's training, there's mentoring, and bosses have to be able to shift back and forth between personas. Sometimes you have to be the commander, and sometimes you have to be the consultant. Sometimes you have to be the taskmaster, and sometimes you have to be the nurturer. And it goes back to your question about the balance between compliance and ethics, or laws and ethics. There's a bottom line, there's what you have to do. And then there's an ideal of what you could be doing, what you should be doing. You have the potential to be doing. There's nothing that makes us happier than doing a job well. When I'm doing a job and I'm just trying to get by and I'm just trying to get away with what I can get away with, I don't feel very good about myself. I don't feel good about what I'm doing. I'm not doing a great job. I'm not doing anything important because I'm not putting much into it. But when I'm doing a job that I'm all in, I feel this sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. And so the boss is there to create the environment that makes employees want to invest themselves in what they're doing. And when they do, they perform better, they produce more, they're happier, and everybody benefits because now you've created an environment where everybody's glad to be there instead of an environment where everybody's watching the clock, waiting to go home.
And what I'm hearing is, as a leader, you have to be flexible in your mind and in your actions.
Absolutely. They say the best CEOs do nothing in the sense that they arrange all the moving parts and oversee them and make sure everything is running smoothly. Good leaders are able to have that flexibility, have that willingness, to know when they need to get down in the trenches and to know when they have to be above it all, watching everything and making sure everything is running the way it's supposed to be.
And any thoughts for junior leaders? Some of them are thought to be very micromanaging in their actions.
It's always difficult when you're told to do something that you know is not in the best interest of getting the job done. And that takes a tremendous amount of creativity and can pose an ethical challenge because now I have to choose between following orders and doing the job. So is my loyalty to the manager who issued the order, or is my loyalty to the business and the workplace and the client or the customer or the consumer? And that's a very challenging dance. And that's why it comes back to the idea that I said that ethics has to be a mindset, because there's no app for this. There's not always a clear answer. If an employee recognizes that I have to take responsibility for something that's not my responsibility or it won't get done and it needs to get done, then there is an ethical imperative to do that. On the other hand, there's a risk involved also, but there's also a bigger risk in not doing it. Because even if I may be able to cover myself, but at the same time, everybody suffers because the job didn't get done. And so for people who are in that sort of middle position or junior position, the best advice really is to find someone above them with whom they can form a relationship, even if it's not their direct boss, but maybe it's somebody else in the hierarchy. And if I form relationships with people who will help me learn how to navigate the challenges of business, then ultimately I'm going to grow. And sometimes ethics demands that we simply remove ourselves from a situation because it's clearly not going in a direction that's going to be successful.
So you mentioned that ethics is a mindset, and I would be curious to know what would be the character traits that fall under ethical behavior?
In my keynotes, I give a very simple formula for cultivating that ethical mindset, which is ask yourself, what would it be like if everybody did what I'm about to do? What kind of an environment would that be? What would that world look like? If everybody's cutting corners and everybody's getting away with the minimum and everybody's out for himself, is that a world I want to live in? Is that a company I want to work for? There's a story I like to tell of the people in the lifeboat. They're rowing away from the shipwreck, and one guy pulls out a drill and starts drilling a hole in the bottom of the boat. And of course, everybody yells at him, "What are you doing? You out of your mind?" He says, "Well, what's the problem?" He says, "You're drilling a hole in the bottom of the boat." He says, "Well, what's it to you? I'm only drilling it under my seat." Yeah, but we're all in the same boat. We don't live in a vacuum. Nobody lives in a vacuum. No man is an island. I can't claim that my actions don't have an effect on the world I live in. And if we don't have that awareness, then we are causing destruction even when we don't intend to.
So awareness is the key.
Yeah, we're all responsible for the world we live in and for how much disruption one person can cause simply by being unaware.
I want to circle back and talk about diversity and inclusion and ethics. A lot of people talk about, diversity inclusion. It comes down to percentile at this point. We need this percentage of this kind. And so what are your thoughts on that?
I think this is another area where there has to be a delicate balance. I mean, I remember when I was in college and affirmative action was coming on the scene. And there were stories about how qualified candidates were not being admitted to universities because spaces were reserved for minorities. Well, in some cases, not all, but in some cases, those minorities that were admitted didn't have the qualifications for those programs and ended up failing. So who gets served? We didn't serve the people we're trying to help because we put them in a program they couldn't succeed in without giving them the tools to be able to succeed. And we didn't serve the people who should have gotten those spaces because we exempted them because we had this vision of how to make the world fair. What could have made it work, and which does make it work in some places, I've been told that the United States Army actually has an extremely successful program for taking candidates who don't have the fundamental qualifications and putting them in a program that gets them up to speed so that they become qualified and they do succeed. But that's a lot more work. It takes a lot more creativity, a lot more effort, a lot more money to actually help balance the playing field. So there are no shortcuts to fixing these long-term social problems. On the other hand, we can't ignore them because when young people grow up in situations where they don't have advantages and they can't get ahead and they can't get even, then you're perpetuating this cycle of failure. And that's unjust also. And even worse than that, when we don't have a variety of people, which doesn't just mean colors, it means backgrounds. It means points of view. Because when we all sit down to talk out an issue, to look for solutions. If we're all coming at it from the same point of view, then you're back to the group thing. It's an echo chamber. We all see it the same way. We all agree with each other. And everybody who disagrees, he gets shot down because he's not seeing it our way. Whereas if you have a variety of points of view and everybody feels free and safe and comfortable to voice their thoughts, then you avoid disasters like the Challenger space shuttle disaster and the 2008 financial meltdown and the French Maginot Line in World War II, the Bay of Pigs fiasco. I mean, history is filled with examples where everybody agreed this was the thing to do, and those few voices of dissension were shot down, were suppressed, weren't allowed to speak, and catastrophic actions were taken that resulted in disaster. So the idea, what I call intellectual diversity, having a number of people from different points of view so that we can have a real debate, a real discussion, a vibrant meeting place of ideas where every point of view is welcome, and together we can examine issues from every side and every angle, and then have the confidence when we make a decision that we're moving forward in the right direction.
And to do that, you have to create a safe space.
A safe space in the sense that people feel safe to express their points of view. The term safe space on college campuses has come to mean exactly the opposite. I want a space where nobody's going to challenge me, where nobody's going to say anything that makes me think or makes me question my own point of view. And that's exactly the opposite of what universities are for. Universities are supposed to be for promoting thought and promoting new ways of looking at things and challenging one another and coming to a greater appreciation of the different sides so that we can come closer to real wisdom.
And just to kind of get your opinion on word fairness, everyone is talking about it. Can you tell us from an ethical perspective, what is really fairness?
Fairness is fairness of opportunity. It's one of the problems that we face because what's happened to our political system. It's almost impossible to aspire to politics unless you have enormous financial backing. And it's virtually impossible to succeed in politics unless you're willing to adhere to the party line. And so, again, we end up with these monolithic political parties that are guided by groupthink, where nobody's allowed to speak up, where nobody's allowed to present an opposing view, where compromise is a dirty word, and where moderation is a slur. The extremes have taken over both parties, and that means that it's almost impossible to find common ground. So you find in the political primaries, which we now have to watch for a very long time, that the candidates are fighting with each other who can be the most extreme, because that's how you win the party. And as soon as you win the party nomination, then you have to shift back to try to convince people in the middle that you're really not as extreme as you've been painting yourself, which means nobody really believes anything the politicians say because they themselves are constantly shifting their positions. So we don't believe in their ethical principles. And we believe that the system is fundamentally unfair because it doesn't allow for honest debate and it doesn't allow potential leaders to rise as they used to in former times. And certainly in business, we want to be recognized for the work we do. We want to be treated respectfully. We want to be paid what we're worth. And we want to have a reasonable opportunity to advance if we demonstrate merit. And that we won't be overlooked because we don't come to the right school, or we're not friends with the right people, or we're not married to the right people, or we haven't played the game in order to ingratiate ourselves. So fairness is not fairness of outcome, because ultimately that's something that is beyond our ability to engineer.
So how do you preserve your own individuality when everything is always shifting?
I think it comes down to sincerity. And I use the model of Jewish scholarship, where if you walk into a library and you don't hear a sound, if you walk into a Jewish study hall, you hear yelling and screaming and banging and people getting all heated. It's passionate. But at the same time, it's not personal because we want to get to the truth. And the only way I can get to the truth is if I listen to the other side first. Because once I listen to the other side and I articulate back what they said to make sure I heard them correctly, that process helps me understand my own point of view better. And in the course of understanding where someone else is coming from, I can recognize that either I'm not that far away from that, or perhaps I have to reevaluate my own point of view. And by doing that, I don't retreat into dogma or ideology. I'm not afraid of people who disagree with me. I don't vilify people who disagree with me. I'm more secure in my own position because I've reasoned my way to it. I haven't merely absorbed it from the people around me in my environment. And it's that intellectual security that allows us to be individuals. I can talk to people that we have very, very different beliefs, but if I recognize their intellectual integrity and their sincerity, I can respect them for their beliefs even if I disagree with them. And that's how I keep my individuality even while I'm able to accommodate others who think differently.
Any final thoughts?
I think the most important thing for leaders is integrity. And integrity is a word we don't always define properly. Integrity comes from the word integer, which means whole. And that means that I don't just talk the talk, but I walk the walk. I demonstrate through my behavior that I am committed to the values that I articulate, that I espouse. And when people look to you, look to me, look to a leader and see someone who is true to his own values, who is committed to a mission, who shows respect for other people, that person becomes a magnet and a source of inspiration. And that's what makes for successful business, and that's what makes for successful homes, and that's what makes for successful society.
And how can people contact you? I know that you're a keynote speaker. I invite you to speak, learn more about you.
Easiest way is on my website, Yonason Goldson, and is also my company, Ethical Imperatives. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I'm always eager to start a conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Yonason, for being a guest.
It's been delightful. Thank you, Biana.
Our special guest was Yonason Goldson, Director of Ethical Imperatives, LLC. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Leadership with Biana Kovic Show. Remember that you're all leaders in your own rights, and the impact that you're meant to achieve starts with small acts of kindness, curiosity, and generosity. Please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you again, and until next time.